The return of cultural heritage objects is a growing practice worldwide, fueled by demands from source countries whose cultural heritage has been plundered during conquests and colonial times and is still prey today to contemporary trafficking. Return and restitution claims also stem from recent movements of re-examination of how the collections of European and North American museums were constituted. Return claims often meet with cool responses, when not frank hostility, from many North American and European museums. One argument often put forward to refuse these demands is that the very mission of museums in favor of conservation, preservation, access, research, and education would be jeopardized if their collections were to be depleted from some of their highlights. Implicitly, such arguments envision museums as the ultimate repository of all human cultural and artistic output, and derive from a Eurocentric epistemology that often ignores alternate uses of cultural heritage objects. Indeed, many non-European cultures contemplate wear from use and decay as the normal fate of the objects they produce. Yet, museumification interrupts these processes by positing the preservation of these objects in the name of science. Today, we would like to start a discussion on the concept of demuseumification, whereby the accumulated set of preservation expectations from a piece that has been in a museum for a long time is challenged by alternative practices upon the return of the piece to its country or culture of origin. Demuseumification can subvert the expectation that a returned object remains in the realm of museums, allowing it to acquire new or regain old societal and cultural functions. At least at this point, demuseumification appears as a challenge to the European institutions that, despite of decolonization, still retain the power to decide what is returned, when, and on what initial terms.
In the limited time we have, we would like to bring up the Historical Museum of Bern's 2014 return of an ancient Bolivian statue identified by Bolivians as an Akaico, an important deity in modern Bolivian life. Taken by a 19th century Swiss diplomat and accompanied by the near standard racist collection story of giving indigenous people alcohol, the contemporary significance of the Akaico made the statue a focus of Bolivian repatriation efforts. Upon agreeing to return the statue to Bolivia, Bern required that Bolivia store the piece in an acceptable museum environment. We've collected a number of cases where a promise to maintain the returned object in a museum that meets European standards is presented as a requirement. Some museum return guidelines specifically state that such a requirement should be made during the evaluation of any case for return. Yet such a requirement challenges the idea of a true transfer of control with the handover of the object, allowing for European cultural ideas of the object as a museum piece to be retained, perhaps even in situations where that is socially, culturally, or politically inappropriate. Even in the majority of situations where the receiving country or culture plans on incorporating the returned object into their modern museum system, requiring it still implies some degree of European control. We ask if, to return with such strings attached, is truly a complete return of the object. Is it an act of decolonization when the former colonial or imperial power are still able to mandate that the objects stay within European approved contexts, such as the museum? In the case of the Akaico, Bolivia publicly, if temporarily, challenged the stipulation. Upon the statue's return, the Bolivian government attached it to a clear box on top of a car and slowly drove it through La Paz, allowing people to shower it with coca leaves, alcohol, and adulation. Nothing about that met modern museum standards, but the Akaico, at least for that time, fully took on its cultural role for indigenous Bolivians, something that is impossible within a museum.
To conclude, we propose that returns do not necessarily imply a challenge to the current museum order, whereby once museumified, objects may have little chance to revert to their previous social use or to acquire a different one altogether. A decolonized museum implies a shift in practices and discourses that stops imposing conversation standards in the name of science so as to accept alternative visions of how to deal with objects from the past. We ask, to what extent should these museums be allowed to have the last word on the future of the objects after a return has occurred?